Good morning, YouTube. So, it's about 9 a.m., a little bit after. I'm in the middle of this piston soak here on this Toyota 4-cylinder. It's a 2.4 liter 2AZ FE engine. It's on a 2006 Toyota Camry SE. Some of the SEs also have V6s, but this is a 4-cylinder one. So in this case, I'm using the Berryman B12 chem tool. Nobody's made a video on it yet that I've seen for the piston soak. Some people have used Marvel Mystery Oil. That stuff's pretty weak. Some people use Seafoam, which is stronger, but still not as strong as this Berryman B12 chem tool. This stuff is so strong that if you spill it on your paint, it can take off your paint. Interestingly enough, some of the ingredients in here are the same ingredients that are used in paint thinner or paint stripper, which that explains why it can eat the paint. And it smells like paint thinner also, I've noticed. So if you've never done this before on this particular engine, if you never removed the spark plugs before, I'll just briefly go over that. You could watch a video on how to remove the spark plugs if you need to, but it is super easy on this car. I mean, you're going to have these two 10mm bolts that line up right here. You're going to take them off. To take off this cover, those bolts go on these two little studs right here. And once that's out of the way, then you have 4 of these coil on plug, the ignition coils that sit on top of spark plugs. So you're going to unplug them. On this engine, the plastic tabs that hold them on, they love to break off. All 4 of them have broken off of here. They all broke off like 40,000 miles ago. But amazingly, these connectors, they still stay on there even though the tabs are broken off. I didn't have to tape them on or anything. They just stay in place. But anyway, so you pull off all 4 of these connectors. Or if you're worried about breaking those tabs, another option is maybe you could try to just leave them on and just try to pull it out. I don't know. I don't know if there's enough wire to just leave them connected. I didn't really try that. But anyways, you got to get those coil packs out of the way so you can get to the spark plugs. And you need a 5/8 inch spark plug socket, standard size. You just need that little rubber piece in there, spark plug socket, to help hold on to the spark plug. You need an extension. It doesn't have to be quite this long. See, I still have a lot sticking up, but this is just the length of the one I'm using. It's, I guess, 12 inches probably. 3/8 inch drive extension. I already have these 3 spark plugs out because I'm in the middle of the process here. So the first soak that I did was around 1 p.m. yesterday. I waited 8 hours, turned the engine over 3 times. I'm going to show that in a minute, how I manually turn it over. Turn the engine over 3 times, plus an extra quarter turn. Then I soaked it again, 9 p.m. Now I'm doing this again roughly 9 a.m. I want to do it roughly 12 hours apart. So after I do this process 4 times, I might do it a 5th time, starting back at that first position, and do that a few more hours, because that first one was only 8 hours. But also, when I first did this, there was some oil, especially on cylinder number 1, which is all the way over here. And I came to realize this valve cover, I must not have torqued it down properly the last time I did this 40,000 miles ago. I didn't know these 2 center bolts actually go down to 10 foot-pounds instead of 8 like the other ones, and they were actually a bit loose, about half a turn. So I'm hoping that's the only reason that oil was getting in there, because I just replaced this gasket 40,000 miles ago. The valve cover gasket shouldn't be bad again, but I was getting oil a very, very small amount into these 3, but especially on that number 1 cylinder. So anyway, some oil went down into the after I pulled out the spark plug, some oil went down into the combustion chambers there on top of the pistons. So that's why I'm thinking about doing that first position a 2nd time to help clean that oil. Plus, that first time I only did it for 8 hours to 12. So after you have all 4 of your spark plugs out, let's get this out of here. That's when you can turn over the engine. You don't want to turn over the engine with the spark plugs in. Oh, my jacket's already ripped. Just got it ripped a little more. Oh well. So now that all your spark plugs are out of the way, when you first start this process, you don't need to turn the engine over at all. But after you've let it sit there 8 or 12 hours or so, then on this particular car, in order to get to the crank pulley and the bolt on the crank pulley, you have to remove these two 10mm nuts that go onto this panel. That hole will line up here. This one will line up here. And there's actually another one holding it. Oh, it's being held in place somewhere here in the front, close to the bumper, but I just pulled it down at an angle instead of taking the whole thing off. Now on some cars, you'll have room to come in through here with a socket or like a really long bar, like a pulley. What do they call that tool? There's a tool for when you're working on your serpentine belt and your pulleys and all that. You know what? I think I have it over here. Serpentine belt toolkit. So yeah, on some cars you can just reach through the top here with a long bar and a socket on the end. Some cars you have enough room to get a socket wrench in there, but it's a really small clearance through here. So for this car, it's easier to come over here, and let me get a light in here so I can see a little better. Okay. Now see, on this crank pulley, there's already some markings. There's a number 3. That other thing says AT or whatever. There's another marking here, it says 6N or something. So I could just use those markings to know how much I've turned this pulley if I wanted to. But to make things even easier, I had a can of light blue spray paint sitting around. And you can see I sprayed right here on the bottom. But now you can see it's moved a quarter turn over. Now it's going to be pointed up. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn this engine over 3 revolutions by hand, and then plus a quarter turn, so it's pointed up. And that helps work the product into the piston rings and the oil return holes. That's really the whole problem on this engine, is the oil return holes inside of the pistons were made too small for the oil to travel through, and they get clogged up. And then you have oil consumption. So I'm using a, let's see, this 18 or 19 millimeter? This is a 19 millimeter socket here. And I'm using a 1/2 inch drive. With all the spark plugs out, pretty easy to turn over by hand. It's even easier when you have 2 hands. There it goes. I think this engine got a little cold overnight. It dropped down in the 30s. Plus I'm holding the camera in one hand, so that's making it a bit harder. Dang. I keep slipping off because I'm using one hand. That was 3 and a quarter turn. Okay. So each time I do this, after every 8 to 12 hours, I'm adding a quarter turn, because during this whole process of 2 days or so, maybe even 3 days, the longer you do this, the better. But during this whole process, I want the pistons and the cylinders of the engine to be at different positions over this process. That way we ensure that they all kind of sort of hopefully get the same level of cleaning. I mean, that might not exactly be the case, but trying to anyways. Some people, what they'll do is they'll try to make sure they get all their pistons at mid height by sticking some wooden sticks in there and taking measurements and all this stuff. That's fine if you want to do that. There's more than one way to do this. This is just my method. See, what's another thing? Some people, instead of turning over the engine by hand, they'll turn it over with a key. But if you're gonna do that, then I would recommend either unplugging the wiring harnesses on your fuel injectors or taking out the fuse or the relay for your fuel pump. That way you're not spraying gas in there while you're doing this. Personally, I like to turn over by hand. That way I know where that pulley is, because if you're just turning the engine over, you're not going to know what position that pulley is. You're not going to know where all your pistons are, mid-stroke, top, or bottom. So this is the way I prefer to do it. Also, another reason that I'm not turning the engine over with the key is because I have all the oil drained out of it right now. So if you are going to do it that way, every 8 or 12 hours, you want to turn the key over for a few seconds, then you don't want to drain your oil out until you're completely done with this process. But I have the oil drain plug out, I have the filter out. If you're doing this during hot weather and you want to slow down the evaporation process, then maybe that's another good reason too, to keep your oil drain plug and filter. But in my case, it's cold out. And another thing is, you know, after you pour in your chem tool, you want to put your old spark plugs back in, just finger tight, to help reduce evaporation. I am still doing that, but it's so cold out that with the oil drain plug out, I noticed just a very slow drip coming out of the drain plug. So I know that product is slowly working its way through, but it's not just like pouring through. So yeah, so now let's go ahead and pour some Berryman into the cylinders. So if you think you might get the stuff on your hands, then you probably want to wear some gloves. Me, so far, I haven't gotten any on my hands. You're going to want to use a funnel. Oh, excuse me, I have a cold lately. You're going to want to use a funnel, so that way you make sure you get all of it in there. And when you're completely done with this whole process, besides the oil change, you want to make sure you put in some brand new spark plugs. It's not a good idea to reuse old spark plugs. New spark plugs, they already come with a special coating, depending on what brand you get, I guess, but most of them come with special coating, like NGK does, because they're a good brand. And if you add that anti-seize, that's what I was thinking of, you'll actually end up over torquing if you go with the regular torque specs. And I forgot what the torque spec is on this for these. I'll have to look it up when I'm done and put them back in, but I'm going to be trying out Ruthenium spark plugs too while I'm at it. Those have been out for a few years now. I've only ever used Iridium in the past, so we'll see how those are. This engine, another thing I forgot to mention, it currently has, I think, around 210,000 miles. I picked out this car for a family member, and it had 170,000 miles. And I started running synthetic oil in it. That's when I started noticing the oil burning. At first, I think it was burning a quart every 500, every 1,000 miles. But as I got up to like the 200,000 mile mark or so, I started noticing it burning even more, like a quart every, I think I said that backwards at first. I think originally it was a quart like every 2,000 miles, yeah, at first. And now it's a quart like every 1,000 miles. But then I went with a thicker oil. I guess I'll show that real quick. And it started burning at like half the rate. So I was usually always using, is this the one I use for this car? Yeah. So I was usually always using, Pennzoil is better than Mobil 1. If you don't believe me, watch Project Farm videos on YouTube. I used to use Mobil 1. Then a couple years ago I switched to Pennzoil. So I was using this, and then that oil consumption went down by about half when I went to this Euro version. And I learned that's because they put extra detergents in there, and also their oil is a bit thicker. It's still a 30 weight oil, but it's on the higher end scale of a 30 weight. Then I was thinking of jumping up to a 40 weight oil to help reduce oil consumption. But then I learned that's not good for variable valve timing and all that stuff. You can mess something up when you have a variable valve timing vehicle. So it's better to just reduce the oil consumption and keep using the proper oil. As a matter of fact, I probably really should go back to the non-European version as well. So maybe I'll do that after we're done here with the piston soak. So here's what I've been doing, is putting roughly 2 ounces into each cylinder. It comes as a 15-ounce can, so I got a third can, but as it turns out, if I only ended up using 1 can to do the 2 piston soaks so far, so I guess maybe I've really been doing a little less than 2 ounces. Either that or this actually has over 15 ounces in it, I'm not sure. So maybe I'll just use the leftover can that I have and pour it in the gas tank, because this is made to go in the gas tank too. And since this stuff is kind of similar to paint thinner, I would think that it would probably help clean the catalytic converter too. Now I don't have a check engine light on currently for the catalytic converter. Excuse me, Toyota catalytic converters seem to last a really long time compared to other cars, I've noticed. But with all this oil burning, it probably is getting that catalytic converter dirty over time. So doing some kind of cleaning to it would probably be a good thing, because eventually it probably will cause a check engine light. All that oil burning should be clogging up that catalytic converter. Also, I had like this white ashy looking deposits on the bottom of the spark plugs, I noticed. And that's probably also from the oil burning. That's number 2. Here's number 3. I'll probably follow up in a month to see how the oil burning is coming along, or maybe in 3 months when I do the oil change. I usually have to check it every month. I have to add oil, and usually every 3rd month I do the oil change. Usually 3 months is about 6,000 miles for this car, and I like to use that Pennzoil Ultra Platinum every 6,000 miles roughly. I meant to mention too, I think I need a little more. If you're using a plastic measuring cup, you can expect it to probably get ruined. Excuse me, even if you try washing it right away, I mean, this thing is just, this is getting damaged. I'll just have to get another one. This thing is really useful for the measuring though, so it's worth it. Just have to get another one. So now all you have to do excuse me, is put your spark plugs back into the cylinders to help reduce evaporation. Now when this process is completely done, you want to make sure that you don't have any leftover product in there. So you can pull out the spark plugs and let it dry for several more hours. You can, let me go grab this here. You can use something like this. Stick it down into the cylinders, pump out any leftover fluid. If you happen to have an air compressor with an air hose and an air nozzle, you can go in there and blow them all out. Another thing you can do is turn over your engine. In my case, I can't because I have the oil out, but if you have oil in your car, you can turn over the engine while the spark plugs are out, and that liquid and stuff will just shoot out of here, and you can just clean up when you're done, or you can place over some rags to try to catch some of it. But anyways, whatever method you want to use, you need to make sure that there's no liquid left in there before you put your spark plugs back in and start up your engine and take off and drive. And you got to make sure, like I said before, to do a fresh oil change. Put in some new spark plugs while you're at it. On a Toyota, these Denso coils usually last a long time. You don't usually need to replace them if it's on this vehicle. But now these boots down here, the boots and the springs, should be replaced. I have new ones I'm going to put on that I ordered from rockauto.com. Excuse me. You know what? While I'm at it, I should show the spark plugs I got too. Alright, so here's our Denso coil-on spark plug boots. Part number 6714319. Denso is always a good brand for Toyota. But in this case with the spark plugs, instead of Denso, I went with NGK because they have the Ruthenium, but it still has the same heat range as the original factory plugs, and it still has the same spark plug gap size as the original plug, so it's not going to mess anything up. All the specifications are the same for these plugs. It's just Ruthenium instead of Iridium, which is going to give you better fuel economy, more throttle response. It's supposed to help with a few things. It's supposed to be really good. Better cold starts, they say. So these NGKs are part number, well, here on my order paper it says NG 94279, but on the box here it says FR6AHXS. Oh, I see the other numbers right here. 94279. Okay. So anyways, don't install your new plugs till you're done with the process, because you should only thread them in one time and then just leave them there for over 100,000 miles. So just finish installing our plugs now. They only need to be hand tight. You don't need to crank them down. But when you install your new plugs, just look up the torque specification for your car. I already forgot what it is on this car, so. I'm also not sure if there's a torque spec or not on these little coil packs that go on here. I just know they're 10mm bolts. These are 10mm bolts, and they can break pretty easily, so those, it just holds on the cover, so really you only need that to be finger tight when you put the cover here back on. So there we go. Then let it sit 8 to 12 hours. I'm going to try to do 12 hours from here on out. Then just repeat the process however many times you want to. I mean, heck, if you have the time for it, man, you could even let it sit there 24 hours at a time. You could repeat the process over and over, and you can do this for a whole week of cleaning. If you have the time and you have another vehicle you can drive around, and then you could really super clean these piston cylinders, piston rings, the oil return holes, and all that jazz. So anyways, hope this helps some people out.